We'll see how well technology works as it's connecting us from Vermont to Kentucky. And you know what that means. We've got questions. He's the president and head distiller of Caledonia Spirits. But we're going to be talking about one in particular that they make called Phyllis Whiskey. Let's welcome in Ryan Christiansen.
Hey, Jonathan, great to be here.
Well, I appreciate it. And, I asked you about your name, but I forgot to ask you about where you work. Did I say Caledonia right, or was I way off?
Yeah, Caledonia, like Caledonia County, up here in Vermont.
Okay, well, I feel a little bit better then that I was able to get that right. And, like I said, we'll be talking about the Phyllis whiskey here in a second. But like I said, you guys have been around for a little while. What made you all launch Caledonia Spirits?
Yeah, we have been around for a bit. We got started in 2011. I was actually a beer brewer. That was my background, and I was pretty locked into my business plan of expanding my homebrew store and opening up a commercial brewery. And I met a beekeeper, a fellow named Todd Hardy, from Hardwick, Vermont, Caledonia County, in Vermont. And I visited Todd, and he opened up a beehive, and he started talking to me about the importance of pollinators and bees, and teaching me about stuff that today might be more basic to folks and people are starting to understand. But back then, it was just completely eye-opening to me to realize that we need pollinators, we need bees, and Todd had spent his entire life educating people and supporting bees and making incredibly delicious, pure raw honey. And he wanted to open a distillery. And I saw this opportunity to work with this somewhat quirky and extremely interesting guy who had this connection to bees that was kind of hard to describe, but really just kind of compelling. And so I put my brewery plan on hold, and it's still on hold today, probably never to be picked up again, in all reality. And I joined Todd's team, and we just started distilling, with a little 15-gallon direct fire gin still, and started making gin and utilizing sort of that botanical presence of true raw honey, unheated, unfiltered, but really, fresh honey from the hives, and bringing that botanical expression into a gin profile. And fast forward now, we've grown quite a bit, and we're starting to expand into other categories and having a lot of fun with it.
Well, and you touched on that. Obviously, kind of where you started, bees and honey has stayed with you all to be a big role. But when we say that, it's not just the sustainability side; it's even in the product side, where you guys kind of do a little. What is it? A pure honey vodka, or fermented from honey, and then even your gin has honey in it, in a sense. So, can you talk about why it plays such a big role and how you're able to incorporate it all?
Yeah, I mean, honey is profound, and honestly, coming into my work with a beekeeper, and I'm now a beekeeper myself today. I'm sort of a student of the bees, but I work with all sorts of beekeepers, and now I have 9 hives that I care for myself. So I'm not technically a beekeeper myself, although I feel like I'm early on in that journey. But the layers and the complexity within the species, but also the raw material is just it runs on forever. I mean, I've been distilling for 13, 14 years now, and it seems like we're still learning more about bees. And in fact, like now we're studying like how is soil conditions going to impact nectar quality, which impacts honey quality, which impacts how it's going to, go through the systems in the distillery. So it's like, we just keep peeling this onion, and it just keeps, there's more and more layers. So I always describe it as I'm in my second decade with the bees, and I'm sure there's more decades to go.
Well, it's amazing what you all are able to do, and I'm going to jump around here just a little bit because it is so cool what you all are doing up there. You all just wrapped up the Bees Knees Week 2024 at the end of September. How did that come to be, and why was that something y'all wanted to do?
So Bees Knees Week has become a huge celebration for us. But the reality is, just like our founding, like a lot of the world hasn't really connected the dots on, like, we're all thinking about the food that we eat and what's on our plate and its connection to agriculture and its connection to environment. But sometimes we forget to ask the same questions about the drink. It's tell me about the heirloom tomato and tell me how this animal was raised, and then give me, whatever brand you're serving with some soda water, or whatever it may be. or whatever cocktails on the menu with no real thought about what's actually within that cocktail. Not necessarily everywhere. I don't mean to stereotype, but I think just generally speaking, we've been more focused as a society on the food than the drink as it relates to the environment, but it's the same environment we're talking about. So we've been trying to shine a light on that since the beginning of our brand, both in our own practice and also our outward marketing. And Bees Knees Week actually came about. I was in an incredible cocktail bar with a bartender who was also a beekeeper. And I was with some colleagues and some friends, and we ordered a round of drinks, and we were all playing with this bee's knees variation that the bartender was serving. And because he was a beekeeper, he actually used bee pollen from his hives and honey from his hives. And as he handed me the drink, he said, "What does your company do for the bees?" And it just seemed like such a simple question that I thought I had all the answers for. And I started talking about fair prices that we pay to beekeepers and all the work we're doing to support, environmental awareness and, even like employee benefits and all these things. And he was like, that was all people. You've yet to tell me what you're doing for the bees. And it was this moment that sort of put me on my heels, for a quick moment. And then with a cocktail, we all started talking about what should we be doing for the bees. So we started Bees Knees Week because we said, hey, this cocktail could be a launch pad. It's a great cocktail, Prohibition era cocktail, gin, honey, lemon. The bee's knees means the best. It's sort of a classic cocktail that's already been around for over 100 years. There's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's delicious and approachable and refreshing. And so we said, what if we use this cocktail as a launch pad to start a conversation, serve great cocktails, and encourage people to talk about the importance of bees within agricultural systems, in our own ability to feed our families. 1/3 of every bite of food that we eat depends on pollinators. So the dinner table dramatically changes if we don't take care of the bees and pollinators. So it was sort of born right there. And then we said, hey, this is really not, that was in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And we started the conversation with what if we did it here? And then as I'm driving home, I'm going, this is something we can take anywhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
fast forward to today, we have probably about 2,000 or 3,000 participating accounts around the nation, celebrating in most states. And this year we're going to cross 1 million square feet of pollinator habitat planted. So the program's super simple. All you have to do is order a bee's knees cocktail or make a bee's knees cocktail. Just take a photo of it and post it on social media and tag Bar Hill and hashtag Bees Knees Week, and we plant 10 square feet. And we really had no expectations of the program, but to think that we're going to cross 1 million square feet planted, it's we're now really starting to make a real impact, and so it's just now starting to kind of gain that powerful momentum.
I was going to say, you truly are making, thinking about the bees, all the way through, and you've done that too with the distillery, kind of with the sustainability there as well. When you moved out of the one behind the car lot and moved into the new facility, what made you guys put that effort in there too, and how were you able to do that?
It was hard. I mean, anybody, and if your listeners are distillers who have built distilleries, or breweries, I mean, it's construction's hard, and building a distillery, all the safety components, it's just step one. Building a distillery, an adequate space is a really expensive thing to pull off. So, but we really didn't want to shortchange the environment as it comes to construction, and the specific reason for that is, Todd had built he had a winery when I met him and was expanding into a distillery. So there was quite a lot of work done. And, like anything, hindsight's 2020, but, and the company changed and shifted. But as we grew into that space, I'd constantly run up against, hey, I would have done the floor drains differently. Hey, I would have done, the ventilation system differently. Hey, how am I going to add a heat reclamation system to this distillery? And the answer was always like retrofitting was really hard. So even though there was all this like sustainability opportunity, building it into an existing building where you're already sort of bursting at the seams to build your production plan, it was just so challenging. So it always came down to like the dollars and cents didn't make sense. So it was like, we can't make financial sense of the environment, but we only get one planet, so the whole thing was just out of balance. So I made a commitment to myself, if we ever build a new distillery, we're going to build it right from the beginning. Easier said than done though, because as we got into like the architectural process and the engineering process, and you get the quote and it's way over your budget, it was constantly this sort of like expectation that we would compromise. Like, hey, let's not do heat reclamation right now. Let's come back to the table. We'll add that later on. And that was really non-negotiable for us. We'd rather sort of slow down the construction than sacrifice. And that was mostly because I'd already made that commitment. So we did do it the right way, and I'm really proud of it. It's a 27,000 square foot facility. It's designed so that folks can come in, have a great cocktail. I like to say, wear your mud boots and drink a great cocktail. It's like everybody's welcome. Farmers are welcome. Whether you like fancy cocktails or simple whiskey drinks, come on in. But you can see our process. You can see into the lab. You can see us working with raw honeycomb, trying to understand the botanical profile within honey. You can see into the distillery. We do distillery tours. We've got a beautiful barrel room full of some really interesting stuff, and packaging is all visible. So, it's really designed to say like, hey, we are not just another brand built in the conference room. We are truly built on the farm, and we have sort of just grown from that journey into now, we're trying to really build a national brand, which is quite a journey from humble beginnings of a 15-gallon still in Vermont.
A 15-gallon still in a building behind a car lot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, we've got questions for Ryan Christiansen, who for this time portion we'll be talking about the brand new product that is kind of coming out and is getting to see the world, the Phyllis Whiskey. And you make Bar Hill gin and vodka. What made you want to make a rye whiskey of all things, and then go one step further, pretty much a Vermont rye whiskey using local Vermont grains and local agriculture for it?
I mean, I'll try to give you the short version of a fairly long story, but when I met Todd, we started going down the path of vodka and gin, and that I just had so much to learn about cocktails and spirits in general. Like I said, I was a beer brewer, so like I already had a learning curve for myself, which I was excited about. But one of the first things we did was we closed the winery. I told Todd I couldn't be a winemaker and a distiller. I was neither at the time. And the other thing that I did was I went down to Kentucky, and I just said, I need to learn everything I can about whiskey, because honestly, I thought that's the direction that the company would evolve into. And that's what I was drinking at home. If I was drinking spirits, it was probably bourbon. So I said, I'm going to go find, sort of that spirits culture in Kentucky and try to learn what I can. And honestly, a lot of what I learned was that the bourbon industry is pretty well rooted, relatively approachable pricing. That's changed. This is 12, 13 years ago. But I mean, I was drinking some really good bourbon in Kentucky that didn't cost a lot of money. And meanwhile, putting together a business plan, looking at the cost of certified organic, corn grown in Vermont, and just, and also meeting some incredible distillers that had 20 years experience, and I had no aged whiskey at the time. And I'm going, how am I ever going to build a business where I could take something to market that's going to be competitive in quality and price? It was just feeling like a bit of a tricky needle to thread. Meanwhile, our gin brand was doing really well. We were at the farmer's market with lines out the door, and the 15-gallon still was hardly big enough, and the vodka was doing well. And I was learning a ton about, the history of gin and cocktail culture, and having a lot of fun with that. So I studied bourbon for some time. I had a small interest in rye, and then we were having pretty good success in the spirits biz, with our gin and our vodka. And but around 2015, Todd actually told me that he wanted to slow down and get back to the farm, and which I thought what he meant was, retire. I'm just going to take a sip of water here.
But that's not exactly what he meant, right?
I thought what he meant was retire, but he actually bought 100 acres of land, and he built a certified organic rye farm. And so Todd is actually now farming rye, bringing that rye to the distillery, and then we're making our Phyllis whiskey from Todd's land. So, and that process was long. I mean, that was he did it in record time, but that was like literally picking the stones out of the field so that you could grow crops in this field. So, I mean, we're talking about a pretty labor intensive effort for somebody who I thought was implying he was headed toward retirement. Hardly the case. But from that day forward, we started making our rye whiskey with no real rush to take it to market. So that was our first barrel was filled in 2016. We filled 12 barrels in 2017. We did about 24 barrels in 2018, and we've just slowly grown the program since then. And then when we got to Montpelier, we built a bigger, our Montpelier distillery. We've got a mill room. We've got a sizable mash tun. We've got more fermentation capacity and more distillation capacity. So we have ramped it up since then. But even today, we're producing 70 or 80 barrels a year. It's still a very small program. But what that's allowed for is we can run our core business with gin and vodka. That's what we're doing. 99% of our production is there. But then we're also building, a small bit of inventory, and just approaching that with patience and a commitment to quality and environment that's probably not seen out in the spirits industry too often
I was gonna
yet.
say, I mean, the hardest part of whiskey is being patient and time. It's not, all that takes a lot of effort, and for those that are checking it out, you can see the bottle. Phyllis in her walk in the woods rye whiskey. Now, Phyllis is an interesting character, if I'm correct. Comes from your grandmother, who wasn't a drinker. Is that right? Is that where the name comes from?
So that the drinker part's debatable. I'll come back to that. So, my grandmother, she passed right around the time that I was becoming a distiller, and so, and I never finished going to college. I'm still, that and the brewery business plan. They're all sort of on the, on pause. But I was headed down a path of business school, and I paused that, and I decided I wanted to get my hands, roll my sleeves and get my hands dirty in the business world. So I opened the only business I knew, which was a home brewing store. And so my grandma saw that as maybe not the greatest life decision, to stop going to college and open up a small shop to sell barley and hops. But I was really into it, and I saw, sort of all sorts of tentacles that could emerge from my interest in fermentation. And so anyway, I'd go visit my grandmother when she was at the nursing home toward the end of her life, and I'd usually go with my sister, who she was fascinated with my sister's career choice, and they'd have a great conversation. And then she'd always turn to me and say, "Well, how's the booze business, Ryan?" Sort of implying that she wasn't too happy with my decision. Um, but it's so much more than the booze business. I'm not a distiller because I want to bring a bottle of whiskey to the party. That's a fun perk, I suppose. But I'm really personally committed, and I think I speak for my whole team. We're really trying to create a stronger connection between agriculture and cocktail culture. There's this beautiful, thriving, blossoming community of people, bartenders, just really expensive cocktails in metropolitan areas, and it's such a fast-paced environment. And then you've got farmers who are struggling to pay the bills, and they're having to sacrifice, treating the land the right way versus the wrong way, just because of the financial pressure. And I think it's the distiller's role to connect those two, so that, if there's going to be a $24 cocktail, we shouldn't have a farmer spraying his fields with pesticides because he can't afford to rest the land and treat the land the right way, and he or she. And I think that like brewing and cooking is not so foreign to people for some reason. Maybe we just have more exposure to it. But once you get into distilling, there's often this, it's almost like this magical process that people don't want to understand. And that's definitely less so now. But even 12 years ago, it was like, oh, I don't understand how
Yeah.
that works. And people, because they weren't a part of the conversation, that kept them out of the conversation about the farmer, and it kept them completely glued to the conversation about what was happening behind the bar. So I just see this opportunity for us to sort of create that stronger connection. And long story short, I decided to bring my grandma along for the journey, because I think, I think if she saw that appreciation, saw that, I think she'd have an appreciation for it as well. But the piece about Phyllis, there are these rumors, and I hear them every so often at a family get together, midnight, and my grandma Phyllis was drinking whiskey and smoking a cigar. And I can't, for the life of me, even picture that. It's so different than anything I ever saw from my grandma. But I don't know whether it's true or not, but I think it brings a little life into her presence in the distillery.
Absolutely, and it's a great pour that you've been able to make. I believe what 8416 is the mash bill on it, which is again kind of another unique thing. What when you're coming up with kind of those her walk in the woods, I've got the port cask finish. You're able to do some other things with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, in the brand, I mean, there's a lot of language involved in the brand. There's a lot of story to be told. And the reason for that is one, we're not trying to come out of the gate with like a core line that's listed right now. We'll get there in time, but there's a fair amount of education and research that went into every barrel, particularly the ones that are old right now. So as we're coming into creating any blend, we're looking at a lot of our older barrels and we're tasting through them and we're saying, hey, this barrel's, quite a bit different than this barrel. And most of those older barrels are becoming part of a blend. They've got a lot of maturity to them. They've got a lot of complexity to them. Some of them are created in lots. Some of them were created, when we hadn't really formalized a lot of stuff. So some of them won't even go to market. Um, but then when you come into the 2021, 2022, and 2023 barrels, everything that we produced since we came into Hardwick, all of that's a little production's a little tighter, volumes are a little bigger, so that's becoming sort of the lion's share of what we want to take to market. But that's not that old yet. It's some really great whiskey. We're really excited about it, but the stuff within those lots that's starting to get older, plays really nicely when we blend it with the elder stuff. So our first release was actually called Phyllis in the Wide Open Field. And we just grabbed a 4-year-old barrel that we were really proud of. We were really excited about it. And we sort of described the feeling of when Todd said, hey, I bought 100 acres of land and we're going to make whiskey here. And it was sort of like, which way are we going to go? We don't know, but we're going to take care of the environment. We're going to grow, Vermont grown grains, and we're going to transform it into whiskey here in the distillery. And so that was a barrel that came out really nice. And so we took that out. That was kind of the first release. And then the Walk in the Woods series, the port being one of them, we've taken our oldest Hardwick barrels, some barrels from 2017 and 2018. So they're about 5.5, 6 years old, and blended them with some of our older 21 barrels. So we didn't produce a lot of whiskey during 2020 COVID era. We had just opened up the distillery, and so there's a little production gap for us. So we're blending around that gap. But we're finding that the marrying of those casks and those blends, they do really well. You just give them a little time in a secondary age cask. So we just released our Tokai. You've got the port, but these have been really fun to just put a blend together and let that blend live in various secondary oak casks, and then we're mostly just taking it out to our retail business right now, right on site at the distillery. We've yet to send this through any 3-tier system business yet.
Well, it's awesome. It's a great pour. It's complex. It's got some interesting notes in it, and it's one I think folks should definitely give a try. And when you're talking through all this, I'm guessing other things are going to come down the road at some point because that's just kind of how the business works. But when it comes to balancing making a premium spirit with those conservation efforts, how I'm guessing, like you said, at times in this conversation, there's been some hard things to try to balance because it's not always easy to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. I mean, we're always trying to strike a balance, so to speak. But the reality is, and Vermont's a pretty good place to be, I suppose. We have a lot of land around us. We have a lot of like really courageous farmer neighbors, and there's a lot of people pushing the environmental boundaries around us. So, I think this is where I choose to raise my family and live because I'm really proud of it. I grew up here, and I think Vermont tends to be even though we're a tiny state with a tiny population, we do sort of take a bit of a leadership role as it relates to environmental sustainability. And I think because that's kind of a cultural thing here, I think it's a lot easier, right? If you need help with a project, you need to call on somebody that's done something before. Maybe it's not a distillery, but maybe they built a cheese factory. There's almost always a neighbor you can call on that's going to say, I've been through something like that. So we haven't found that we have to take too many sacrifices in regards to like environment, but that doesn't mean that we're perfect. Like as a company, we have so much work to do. But that's really it's a cultural thing within our team. Is everybody knows that everybody knows it's safe space to bring up. Hey, I think we can do better here because we've got a team of passionate distillers and bartenders and folks all around the table saying, I've got ideas as well. So I don't think that anybody really has to take a sacrifice. I think that the reality is that you've got to talk about what the problem is. So if like with grain, for example, modern agriculture is polluting the rivers. It's not debatable. It's definitely happening. So environmental laws are really getting kind of tricky. That creates hardship on farmers. So it's very easy to be pro agriculture and not pro environment. But the reality is we're not getting to the root of the problem there. The root of the problem is the fact that the supply chain doesn't pay fair prices to those farmers. So if we can actually solve the root of the problem, I don't think anybody disagrees. I think we all know we need to take care of planet Earth. And I think we all know that farmers need to earn a good living. And we all know that people want to drink great bourbon and great rye and great gin. So that's not an unsolvable equation as long as we sort of set the levers right, throughout the whole course of the supply chain.
Well, it's amazing to see the work y'all have put in up there, and what else is coming out that you can talk about? Whether it's maybe a new gin or maybe it's another whiskey at some point. Anything interesting coming down the road that you can tease us with?
Yeah, we've got some cool stuff coming out. So, in Montpelier, we have a bigger barrel room, and that's been kind of the beautiful thing. We also have a team of, Pat, who leads our hospitality program. He's just a whiskey nerd. I don't think he'd mind that I say that, but he's doing a lot of the work in picking our barrels. Mallory and Andrew are still in the barrel room doing a lot of the blending, and then we've got Scott and Ron and our distilling team. We're all just sort of putting our heads around saying, hey, what do we want to do in this barrel room? So a lot of ideas are flowing. A lot of barrels are getting filled up. Some of the ones that I'm really excited about, we just filled up a bitters barrel full of Tomcat, which is like
Mm.
the aromatics coming out of that barrel. We need to get more. We're going to continue to do that. I don't know if you know Sean Hill, the Hill Farmstead Brewery up in Greensboro, but we just put some Tomcat gin, which is our it's this, the same distillate as Bar Hill gin, but aged in a brand new American oak barrel. So we take it out of that brand new oak, and then we've aged it in his stout cask, which
Ooh.
is absolutely unbelievable. Really tasty. Almost finishes with this like stout chocolate kind of just brilliant kind of winter flavor. And outside of that, we've been playing with apple barrels, cider casks, bringing this bright acidity. We've been applying that, and we're playing more with gin than we are with whiskey, but we're having our fun there as well.
I was going to say, what you learn from one, you can take to the other at some point, and you mentioned you're slowly trying to expand the products out and further into the U.S. And so, if folks want to find out where they can find products, or where can they find your products, which are Bar Hill Gin and Vodka, and then obviously the Phyllis Rye Whiskey.
Yeah, so Bar Hill products are sold in 33 states, so we're fairly well distributed. We're not in Kentucky yet, but that's gotta be next on our radar. And then you can go to barhill.com and we have a store finder. Phyllis, we've yet to sell outside of the state of Vermont. You can buy in states where it's compliant to do so. You can also go to barhill.com and you can find where to find Phyllis. So we can ship Phyllis to some states. I'd be lying if I told you that I knew exactly which states we can ship into. It's a pretty limited release right now, but we're getting there. We're emptying more barrels as we come into the older stuff. But the Tokai is for sale right now, which is that was an exceptional release.
Well, like I said, it seems like you've got your hands in some creativity, some fun, and I can't wait to see what y'all have next. And thanks for answering some questions for me, and having a good drink with me too.
Yeah, you bet, Jonathan. It's been great, and we'd love to invite anybody, yourself included. Please come see us. We're on Gin Lane in Montpelier, Vermont, and we have a James Beard awarded cocktail program. I'm really just incredibly proud of the team. So love to host folks. So come on up to Vermont.